Welcome to the Emergent podcast, where we interview product and startup leaders from emerging technology companies about their work in the trenches to bring the hardest and most impactful technologies to life. On today's episode, we're switching things up. We're joined by Christian Marek, VP of Product at ProductBoard, one of our sponsors. We're going to talk about what it means to be an AI product manager. And this episode is much more of a conversation than a pure interview, so you'll get to hear Christian's takes and also some of mine as well. I know you'll enjoy some great lessons on this one. So let's jump straight in. Here's our conversation.
I love building great products, great product organizations, and building great product processes. And that's what led me to ProductBoard, where we're really building the intelligent end-to-end customer-centric product management platform. And AI has always been sort of part of my journey into product management craft as well. I think this really started at DocuSign, where joined the company pre-IPO, built some new products there. But ultimately was always the guy the product ops team tapped on the shoulder when they needed help with like a new process or new operations that they wanted to introduce. And that was a really great experience that really got me thinking about like the product management craft and really set the stage there. Then later on, I went to Meta for a little bit, working on Ads Manager, which is the core product that advertisers use to basically run ads across the Facebook ecosystem. And that was obviously AI in its core, because like that's the way that relevancy and matching and all that works. And that I think was my first really deep exposure, and what really got me interested in the subject matter and the depth of it, and just the vast data that gets processed to ultimately drive results. Then I actually did something interesting. I boomeranged back to DocuSign because there was a very unique career opportunity for me to do that. And one of my first initiatives coming back there was actually productizing DocuSign's first ever AI feature that would help customers basically place fields on documents that much faster. And we saw really good improvements in sort of like conversion rates and accelerating the process. And that was really cool. And that was really I think, beginning of the democratization of AI using NLP models, OCR and whatnot. It was a really great experience, and lots of learning of like how you experiment with AI and how you drive it reality, make it reality. At the same time, I ultimately built, a product team at DocuSign, which is like really focused on our e-signature apps and growing those overall. But AI was definitely a big part of it. Now, ProductBoard, AI is really front and center, and generative AI in particular. There's a huge shift in product management and how the discipline is evolving, and we're really at the forefront by building products that help PMs do the job like 10x faster. Like we have ProductBoard Pulse in market now, which we launched 6 months ago, which helps PMs using generative AI distill like thousands of pieces of customer feedback into actionable insights in minutes. And that would not have been possible without Gen AI. It's amazing. And behind that, is a large agentic AI infrastructure that all makes it happen. So, yeah.
I think almost every product manager at some point in their life has thought about building products for product people. And ProductBoard is sort of like, the most famous, most public example of a company that has done that and done it well. And so I just be curious, like, what are your instincts around why this is such a hard space, but also such a rewarding space? I mean, PMs are like, we are tough customers. It's almost like building sales products for salespeople. It's like the toughest customers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think, look, I mean, maybe just to start like on a positive, I think the space is incredibly rewarding because I don't think it's a solved problem yet, to be honest with you. And I think with Gen AI, there's a unique opportunity to solve the problem once and for all. I think with ProductBoard, we have a real large footprint. We have some very well-renowned enterprise customers, as well as a large set of SMB customers, obviously. And we're hearing, and customers are genuinely excited about our products, about the roadmapping functionality, customer insights, and so forth. Um, at the same time, with this shift, I think there's really an opportunity for us to double down and to really further accelerate our growth and really like double down on some of the things that used to be hardest for PMs, like the discovery use cases, figuring out what to build. Like that's really like the crux and the essence of the job that I think PMs always try to get right. And it's very hard. I think it's going to become much easier and much more interesting with the help of Gen AI. I think, to your point of like, hey, why is it a hard sort of like business to be in? Well, product managers have lots of opinions. That's what they get paid for, and that's great. And so they just, we get lots of love from our customers, but we also get a lot of like feedback. Here's how you guys should build this, and like here's how I would build this. But this makes for really meaningful conversations.
As product leaders looking to incorporate more AI into their work, where do we think the AI is most and least helpful today?
I think the biggest value is in the discovery stages of the product management process. So if you think about like where AI is good, it's great at, and particularly Gen AI, great at processing high data volumes that humans otherwise just couldn't process. It's great at things like wordsmithing, great at gut checking structures, and just providing some default templates. And so we find it to be most helpful in the discovery phase where we have products in market like ProductBoard Pulse that distill customer feedback in minutes, which would have taken a PMs like days or weeks otherwise. We obviously also see, particularly in the product requirements definition process, where if you have like an AI kind of coach that helps you through it, particularly if you're a junior PM, like that's super useful. Then we chat about the V0 and code generation use cases, which are obviously huge. I think in terms of what's less helpful is definitely still as it pertains to applying strategic judgment, because there I think you need to have a lot of understanding of the market, a lot of understanding of the customers, and that happens in typically in conversations with customers, with executives, on conferences that are much more subtle than what's sort of like in the context window or like the context of the AI was trained on. And I think like that's also what's going to set the future PMs apart from the sort of like more traditional feature spec PMs. Is really having the deep understanding of the market and the what customers are saying, and that's also the gap that AI will have and will be much harder to fill.
Do you think we have an advantage? So, like, you and I have both been working on AI for a decade plus, since way before the generative AI phase, to use the phase word. In this case, it really is a phase. And, well, maybe it's the phase through the future at this point. But I always kind of wonder, like, did all that work that we did with computer vision and machine learning and all the stuff that predated sort of generative AI taking over literally every AI feature, do you think it gave us an advantage?
That's a fantastic question. So I think, look, for folks who are like highly engaged, highly motivated, uh, believe in their growth potential, I think they will always catch up to anyone. So, like, if you
Yeah.
go online on YouTube and you watch, for example, a bunch of videos on Gen AI, how to use Gen AI, how does Gen AI actually work, how does the model training work, you'll be pretty caught up on the space of like how to use AI super effectively as a product manager. Now, have you had the battle scars of like failing with AI products and like seeing, the AI quality falling short and then, going through a cycle of brainstorming and figuring out what data you need, how to actually fix that? Well, maybe you don't have that experience, but that's why, maybe reaching out to folks like you and me, sort of like as mentors or as guides that can like help you along the journey might be beneficial. But I think to your point, it is pretty easy for folks that want to and you have like the growth mindset to catch up because there's brilliant content out there that gets them to speed up to speed so quickly.
Yeah, I think one piece of strategic advice that I would give to any company right now that wants to be a tech innovator is you must hire at least somebody who grew up in a generative AI native world.
Yep.
Someone who right now is 23, maybe 24, 25 at most, right? I usually don't like to think of age as a factor in this, but the age really matters in this case because it's about like how did they go to college? What did they see in their very first job? Were they the first person to play with these tools before anyone else did? And I think there's a huge advantage for that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's like when, you and I started, growing up with the mobile phones, obviously that was sort of native to us. And the next generation will have Gen AI native to them. And like, even to take it a step further, I mean, the way that kids do homework today is using the guidance, hopefully not entirely by Gen AI. So that will be yet another generation. It will be even more deeply immersed than the generation that you were just talking about, the 23, 25
Yeah,
year
I,
olds. So that's going to be a whole different set.
I totally agree. And not to get like emotional here, but I really think that there's an incredible amount of luck having been a part of a generation that grew up writing things by hand and then transitioned to computers during school. Because like I know what it means to have slow thoughts. and to be forced to compile them fully on my own. And I think someone who grows up completely native generative AI, they sort of miss that thinking time. Like one of the things that I say all the time with my team is, like, you know, think for yourself, ask AI to think for you, and then think together. And like if you're missing any one of those things, it's actually really difficult to produce an exceptional answer. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if people ever feel like they're really lucky that they were a particular generation, but from a technology perspective, I think it's really cool to have seen sort of analog and digital in a first class way.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really interesting point. I think, like, you could even imagine then that there's gonna be explicit, classes or courses that are gonna be like, "Hey, this is how you operate without generative AI just to, feel what it looks like." It's kinda like in computer science, in my undergrad, there was, like, compiler building. Like, how
Oh,
often
really?
did I need to build compilers in my life? Well, practically like 0 times. It was a great experience though, because, like, now I actually understand how it used to work, and, like, kinda like the parallel to that is what you mentioned, like, actually getting to work without, Gen AI. I also really like what you said about, like, the actual application of how to use it and, like, the guidance that you give. I think it's actually very good to start thinking for yourself in terms of, like, how should something look like, not only to go through the motion and the exercise and just, like, build the muscle, but also because, like, right now it also just leads to better generative AI outputs, than just being, like, open-ended, like, "Hey, give me a PRD spec or give me a PRD template," because, like, everything in a way is custom to a problem, and the more custom you can make it, I think the better PM you are.
Yeah, and it's really easy to forget that when you ask the AI, even if you prompt it incredibly well, it's still giving you answers based on what other people have already done and what other people have done at high volume. So if you ask for a PRD, probably 80% of the PRD is table stakes features. And on the
Yes.
one hand, that's nice because it reminds you, don't forget to have the cancel button or the password reset button or all these things that, PMs lose sleep over that, hopefully in the future we won't have to lose sleep over, but it does sometimes miss, the big stuff. Just thinking in this vein, like let's talk about some real companies here. Like, what companies do you think are currently using AI to successfully improve their products? What companies are not using enough of it that should use more of it? What do you think when you look at the landscape?
Yeah, I think there's a couple B2B companies that really stand out that have actually used Gen AI, like, really well, whether that's, I mean, to me, the ones that stand out are pretty much like ServiceNow, Harvey, Windsurf, a couple of those. And I think what they have figured out is a really deep pain point that the AI actually can solve, and large language models in particular, really well by mostly wrapping some logic around it without necessarily having to go, like, through the bells of whistles of, like, fine tuning, retraining the model, or, like, even training your own model. I think that's kind of like what I think is brilliant about it, because, like, at that point, like, when you just use the core LM, it actually does a fantastic job already, or, like, a good enough job already to solve that pain point, then you have a pretty good signal that, hey, if you go deeper, it's only going to get better. So to me, it's really about, like, these companies, for example, killing it because they found the killer use case that the tech actually works pretty much out of the box for. Now, I still think there's going to be a bunch of, like, long tail use cases where companies will go, do the fine tuning on a customer specific level, and there's a bunch of, like, enterprise search companies that do that, and they'll do extremely well. Don't get me wrong, but, like, what fascinates me is the companies that figured out, like, hey, what's the super deep pain point, and applied, like, the technology just, like, without major, I think, modification. Obviously, the devil's in the detail and not discarding what the work of these companies have done, to solve that problem and drive real business impact.
Yeah, I think what every big company needs right now is an insanely good security officer, because what I
That's right.
see is that they know what you just said, but then somebody is raising their hand and they're saying you can't use any of these tools. And I understand why they're saying that, but they need to figure out a way to allow the company to use the tools. Otherwise, it's you're dead in the water. And I think it's almost like a repeat of, I don't know if you had to deal with this at Meta or DocuSign, but at Palantir, we dealt with this all day long because the company started during the bare metal server installation days, like way pre-cloud. And it took like a solid 5 to 10 years to convince security people at companies that it was okay to put their data in their own private cloud or maybe even in a public cloud. And I feel like the same thing is happening sort of all over again. It's like, well, are we allowed to put our data, are we allowed to have our data go into ChatGPT? Are we allowed to have it in these other places?
Yeah, totally. And to your point, I think it's the really good chief information security officer, the legal team that's actually, acting as an enabler for the company. And I think that's actually absolutely critical. And it's also, I think, the CTO or the architect that's willing to make the big push on the platform to actually move it to enable that. I think those two pieces need to come together for these, like, say, larger established players to be able to make the move.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about user experience for a sec. For B2B companies, what do you think changes when you're building an experience for an AI product as opposed to a non-AI driven product?
Like any software development, I think there's a set of constraints or context that you have to be aware of. And actually, like, I also want to talk about, like, maybe just like mistakes I see people make, and particularly the early AI days as it pertains to user experience. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen with AI is, and companies still make this mistake, is just like calling the AI feature something that's like magic or auto or whatever, because like you immediately set the expectation with the customer that's going to do like 100% of the job, and it's going to be the end all be all. And I still don't think that might be true in some AI use cases, but it's still the minority. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I think the second is actually a mistake that I typically observe is like in the product development lifecycle, whether you want to discovery iteration or discovery phase, and the design teams come together, and the engineering and product teams come together, and then visioning like, hey, what's the ideal? And like in the ideal, the AI always does everything automatically, 100%. But that's very rarely the case. So the question then becomes like, hey, how do you actually design around it? And what are the constraints that you need to work with? Like, hey, do you need to consider an experience that embraces human in the loop? Because like actually, like, hey, if you feed more information into the model, it'll do a better job. But you need to account for that in experience design and in building. Or like, is there a way that you can correct your prompt going backwards, or even the output to like create another sort of like feedback loop? I think the other UX pattern that I see emergent as well when designing AI experiences is all about context specification. Meaning that, like, in the ideal world, the agents or the Gen AI would figure out, like, hey, this is exactly the context I need to pull in. And then, I create a really good response. But I think what we're actually seeing happening, and you see this in Microsoft Copilot and in other tools, is actually that users go and explicitly define, like, hey, here's the set of documents that I want you to take a look at, because that makes it much more specific for the large language model of what to look at and actually produce a good output. And I think that's a pattern that we'll see more and more. And I think some of the coding tools actually ask you, like, hey, which file should I look into? So
Just describing the surface area of what generative AI is good at and not good at is virtually impossible. It's like it's almost fractal in nature, in that the closer you look at it, the more little ripples there are. And I'll give an example. The other day, I was trying to use a foundational model just to figure out the budget of a couple of different cities, and I put it into Perplexity, and Perplexity doesn't know the budgets of those cities. I put it into Grok, and Grok knows the budgets of those cities, and it's just like, how do you define, like, these millions of little edges in the capability of like, I guess at some level, you could reason through it at first principles, and you could say, "Okay, well, we know Perplexity is really good at, like, basic internet research, and we know Grok has everything from what used to be Twitter and is now X, and so, like, maybe at some point someone had a conversation about the budget." But, like, that feels like a stretch, because Perplexity has the whole internet and the budgets are public, so, like, why didn't Perplexity have that answer, Like, is it even worth, I don't know if there's a question here, like, I would just be curious for your reaction.
yeah, now it comes back to trying, right? Like you can reason all day long, sort of like what was the data source and what's the post training they did, or like the specific model company they hired, because that's the engagement pattern they saw and that's what they figured out they needed to get good at. But I think you just need to try it and just like try different models at the same time. And I actually wonder what's going to happen. I'm sure there's some AI tool that already does this out there that I actually think there is. I think I've seen this a long time ago though, that actually aggregates the different like model responses and just gives you the best ones. I mean, that's what we do behind the scenes in our B2B SaaS product already. And like we basically decide on a per use case level, like, hey, what model actually gives you the best response? And then like decide accordingly in the product development process. And I think like you as a PM or an individual, you're just gonna have to try and see. It's also because they change all the time, right? We're still not at a place where it's like perfection. So like what to your point, maybe Perplexity couldn't answer well today, maybe in 2 months when they sort of like release the next version, maybe it's actually gonna totally kill it. So
Yeah.
it's a moving target.
Yeah. Well, in my case, I was actually building a basic lovable app that just gives a quick summary of the city. And Perplexity was consistently better at the summary of the history of the city, but not better at the budget process part. And so I ended up doing almost exactly what you described. I just give it all of the API keys. And I was like, every time ask all of these questions and then recompile the best pieces. And I think I think that's what some of the next few months are going to look like Reviewal, which is a good segue, by the way. So, like, what do we think product management's going to look like in, say, 6 months' time? Not like super far out, but not tomorrow. When a significant amount of code is generated by AI, how is vibe coding going to come into play? Are PMs going to be doing vibe coding? Is that the domain of the engineer? What do you think?
Yeah, I think what we're gonna see in 6 months is two things. Number one is to your point about vibe coding. I think PMs are already doing it.
Yeah.
Like we see PMs doing it. We see PMs almost like shipping to production. Like as we talked about before, obviously, an engineer needs to look over it and make sure it's right, particularly like if you're shipping into your core product. It might be a little bit different, like if you ship into your .com and web services, maybe you don't need as much oversight and supervision. But like PMs vibe coding today and in 6 months from now will become hopefully more common. And I'm saying hopefully because it makes PMs less dependent. So if they just see something in the UX that's kind of messed up or a bug, then they just go and fix it and makes for a better product experience. And actually, by the way, for what it's worth, I think designers should absolutely do the same thing. Like there's oftentimes in apps so many tiny usability issues where they actually in 6 months from now or even today should go and vibe code and just go fix it. And that actually creates some really interesting downstream problems for engineers where they then have a slew of sort of like PRs to work against, not only
Yeah,
from
their
engineering, but
architecture yeah, their
yeah,
architecture reviewer in
totally.
chief, not creator of lines of code in chief.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. So that's going to have a change on the engineering organization and how they will operate as well. And they will probably also need to kind of gatekeep, like, hey, oh my gosh, like one of those vibe code PRs, the quality is different than what I was expecting. So I think it's a very interesting change. I think the other thing on the PM discipline that we'll see is actually more it may be a shift in ratio of PMs to engineers because like as you sort of like can get more done with your engineers, you don't need teams that are as large anymore. They're not saying like, hey, the teams will decrease like from 10 on average or 8 on average to like, just one PM that does it all. But like, hey, do you as a PM still need like 8 engineers if you're actually 3xing the output? Like, can you even catch up with all the customer insights and the product decisions as quickly, or will we actually just need more PMs in the future and actually grow that function significantly to be able to like have all the customer conversations that we need, get all these synthesis from the data and decide that. So I think those are probably the most immediate changes that I'm anticipating.
Let's talk about the AI PM, which I think is really now the PM that we all want, right? Like it's starting to just be like, who are the best PMs? Well, they're AI PMs and they have all of the other skills. But what do you think it takes for a product manager to uplevel themselves and get this distinction as like being the AI PM?
Right, right, right. I think there's a ways of working piece as a PM and then like actually the skill sets. I think ways of working we talked a little bit about where so if like, hey, you have a problem that you need to solve and like put the lens on of what tooling can you use to really accelerate and get the job done more quickly because it's typically the two factors like how well do you solve the problem and like how fast can you solve it and then just like applying gen ai in that lens and just getting it done and then the second piece is about actually like picking up the AI skill sets where, great content available. Obviously, we talked about that, but like really immersing yourself like in the discipline and like spending time and like trying things out yourself with all the tooling that's available out there. So not only going into Claude or ChatGPT, but really trying to figure out like, hey, how do you build your own agent or how do you use these frameworks like Crew AI, where there's like different specialists that do things. And it's not like a high cost task. It is probably high cost because it's like different than what your day to day sort of like pulls you to. But then, if you invest the time, you pretty quickly understand what the opportunities and the limitations are in the large language model world that we live in. I think that makes you, a very appealing sort of talent for your current organization and potentially for future organization as well. So it's both like evolving your ways of working and then also like spending the time and educating yourself because like things just change so quickly. There's always something to catch up on and something to try.
Where can people get in touch with you or find out more about Product Board? What's the best way for folks to reach out?
Sure. So to reach out to me directly, I'm on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Christian Marek. And to learn more about ProductBoard, ProductBoard.com.
Thank you so much for listening. Emergent is brought to you by First Principles, where we provide emerging technology product coaching and fractional product leadership to founders with bold visions. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please consider leaving a review or sharing feedback directly with us. You can always find previous episodes, show notes, and more content on www.emergentproduct.com.